Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm very excited to be speaking to Paul here. I've known Paul for probably like a good part of a decade now, maybe even longer.
Yeah, a little while.
We've both been in the industry for about, I'd say, well, I'd say for me, 15 years.
A little bit longer than that, but yeah.
And we've known you from the times you were at Ping Pong, Incipio, and Wolfpack.
Yeah.
And I just really, I was reflecting, as we've just done the rebrand recently, I was just reflecting how much the industry's changed over the last 15 years. And in preparation, I was speaking to the team, and I just reflected that when we first set up Hummus Brothers, I had a fax machine in the back room to receive orders from customers. And I was like, when I think back to that and where we are 15 years later, the industry's evolved so much. And I'd love to get your perspective on how you've seen it evolve.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's sort of over two things. I think one, from a people perspective, it's changed a heck of a lot. Working, I think I got my first hospitality job in the late 90s, so you can do the maths. And you worked 90-hour weeks, and that was common practice. And you kind of went in every day and you worked as hard as you could. And the way that you progressed was by working harder than the next person. The only way to do that was by putting in the hours. Because the second thing is obviously the sort of flow of data and the information that we have now, we didn't have back then. So you had to kind of work as hard as you could to get there. You didn't have the insights that we have today, where you could know that there's no point in being there at between 8 and 12 because you're not going to take any money. You would sort of just open the doors and hope for the best. So it certainly has changed. And I think now we're in a position where the flow of information is one that allows you to direct your efforts where they need to be, rather than just kind of going hell for leather at it.
Totally. And that's really interesting because both on the people side, I do also feel like there's been a real change in terms of, when you and I first joined the industry, that like people didn't have mobile phones maybe or smartphones as much as they would have today, where it's ubiquitous. So both there's that element of people feeling more comfortable with tech, but also from the tech obviously has also come a long way. So specifically on the data piece, like tell me, how do you think about that from a HQ, so people like it's in head office versus in the GMs on the ground? Like, how do you think about how they will use data differently?
I think it's everybody can sort of interpret data. Data and information are two different things, obviously. You take the data and turn it into information based on your knowledge of your business. From an HQ perspective, you often have a lot more time than the guys that are on the ground. So you can spend a Monday 4 or 5 hours, crunching numbers, looking at things and looking at trend data and everything else. And you're a general manager and you're sort of on the coalface and you've got to make snap decisions based on rotoring or weather or events coming up, stuff like that. You need information to almost prompt you and give you that information ahead of time. I always say to my guys, my job is to give them time. The better I'm doing my job, the more time I can give them to do theirs. And so I think from a general manager's perspective, it's vital that anything you have doesn't detract from that. Over having way too much data for them to sift through is almost as harmful as just give them a really short, sharp focus thing. These are the things I want you to look at. This is what's important. This is what we want you to kind of work on. This is good. This is not good. This is terrible. Prioritize your day. Go off and do it. Type of thing. So
that's amazing. And so so based on what you've just said there, our view of how things have evolved over the last few years is where Tenzo started was really around like bringing all this data together. We then added on like predictions and like giving insights. And really now we're getting to this place where, and we're calling it restaurant performance ops, of really being able to enable that performance in the restaurant on the ground. Do you find how do you find the GMs like think about that in terms of like being able to like make data-driven decisions? Do you see GMs do that? Do you see like, how do you coach them around that?
Every time I join a business, you always kind of go through the inventory of whatever tech they have, whether it's HR systems or payroll or inventory management. And 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you that their system's not great. But it's basically down to the user. These systems are all built by very, very bright people and they're all very sort of high-performing systems. But if you don't use it to its full potential, or if you don't input the right things to it, then it's useless. It'll give you the wrong information. You make the wrong decisions. So it's very difficult to kind of get the guys to dedicate the time to do it. So what the decision we made was we closed all of our sites on a Monday day because we, again, looked at sales data, looked at labor data, everything else. We realized that it was a loss leader for us. We tried to put on one or two things, it just didn't work. So now what we do is we go around each site and we'll sort of have a hit list that we'll go through, and we'll look at average spend, we'll look at labor percentages, we'll look at everything else. But again, very, very targeted. That's 45 minutes to an hour rather than sit there for 4 or 5 hours and have to download a CSV file and put it into an Excel and everything else. We can very quickly get information we want to do and work on it. Take some notes in minutes. Following week, we'll start with the same sort of thing and go, have we moved the needle on these things? Yes, no, maybe. And then we can obviously target each site based on the issue, not issues, but based on the sort of focus areas we have on that site.
And do you find that like decisions within the day are like things that GMs can do? So like, for example, deciding to like motivate the team to try to upsell, or making sure that they don't have too much staff or like too much inventory. Are there those things that you feel like now, compared to like maybe 15 years ago, is that possible now with the data you're getting?
It's definitely possible. Does it happen every time? No. I'd be lying if I said that. But it is there, and those that are engaged with sort of the systems that we run use them really well, and you can see that in the performances. Come end of month when the P&Ls come out, margins are stable, labor's stable. All these sort of costs that we allow them to track are there because we give them the information.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And tell me, like, clearly there's some major headwinds in the industry around like inflation cost and like labor. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about that from the Wolfpack position. Like, how are you? Yeah, what levers are you trying to pull to like?
Yeah, I think again it's looking at sort of the business as holistic as we possibly can. I think things are getting better and we're moving in the right direction with regards to sort of the challenges and all the buzzwords that we're facing: recruitment, inflation, all these things. But what we've done is we've just kind of distilled as much as we possibly can and made a decision, and based on the information that we're getting from the systems we're running, Tenzo being at the head of all that, is we then will make decisions based on, right, we know that for the 3 months where the weather's not great, early part of the week is going to be a loss leader, so we can look at opening up an hour late, or we can look at tweaking this, or we can look at, what's a biggest thing for us is obviously being a beer company as well, is looking at what, excuse me, when our liquids are selling. And we know, obviously, on a sunny day with the doors open and people out on the terrace, stuff's going to fly out. So we'll then, look at putting specials on for key times when we understand that the rate of sale of our liquid is going to be lower. We try and make the right decisions based on the information we have. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't get it right. Totally.
And what looking forwards, like, what are you most excited of for like in trends in the industry, and what are things that you think are going to be like less of a problem in the next like 12 to 18 months compared to what we have? It's a hard one.
That's a good question. I think if I knew the answer to that, there'd be more people in the audience. What am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to summer. Obviously, it's a big one for us, and also the opportunity for growth. I think coming out of COVID, there's been a lot of people that have unfortunately not done so well out of it. So there's a lot of opportunity in the real estate market. There's a lot of opportunity in terms of on our on-trade and off-trade sales as well. It's difficult, that one. In terms of opportunities, I think one of the good thing, and one of the sort of the issues we were speaking about before, was on sort of staffing and recruitment. What we're seeing now is that there's not necessarily I don't feel personally that there's an issue getting headcount. We're able to recruit, but we're not able to recruit skill set, which is pre-existing. So we have a really good opportunity there to kind of to train our own guys, to get them to fall in love with our brand and our story and everything else, because they're coming fresh, having never worked in hospitality. So, there's no sort of comparison to anything else that they've done before. That comes with the challenge of obviously having the time to get somebody up to speed and everything else. But it also gives us the opportunity to create sort of really, really good soldiers for our army, if that makes any sense.
That's very interesting. So you're saying that there are more people that are coming into the industry that haven't been there before than ones that are moving within the industry, is from candidates that you're seeing?
At an hourly paid level, 100%.
Oh, yeah. Wow. And what do you think is driving more people coming into the industry? What's that's great to hear.
It's difficult to answer that. I think opportunity. I think obviously before, and I don't want to use the Brexit word, but before obviously that we had a workforce that was more representative of Europe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably the most PC way I can put that. At the moment, there's certainly for me, the most sort of young British people I've ever seen come into bartending or waitering or anything like that. And I think it's just opportunity. The jobs are out there. People are taking people with no experience, whereas beforehand it would be, people would go and hand in a CV with a school leaver with no experience and say, sorry, you don't have any experience. Now we're like, do you know what, we need you, we'll teach you, come on, join the team.
That's amazing.
So our guys are young and hungry and really sort of keen to get involved.
And do you think the hospitality rising in terms of giving the industry, encouraging people to come in, do you think that's helping? Is that one of the elements that's starting to pay off?
I don't know. I think it's too early to kind of see that. Possibly, yes. I'd say sort of in kitchens and with chefs, definitely. But on the hourly sort of bartender and waitering sort of staff, it's young people that want to work with their mates that work there already, want to have a good time, and want to work for a brand that they sort of believe in. With us creating our own beer really helps. So we've got cool merch and our liquid's really good. Just try it. So I think it's more a case of opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's cool. And tell me, talking about these different brands you worked, so you were at Ping Pong pre-pandemic. You joined Incipio, I think it was July 2020, just at in the middle of the pandemic, and now Wolfpack after post-pandemic, really. And I'd just love to hear how are they different in terms of how they run the business, similarities and differences.
I think it's all three businesses were sort of startup businesses from nothing, so they weren't sort of independents per se, and had grown quite quickly. And a lot of the sort of issues that they would face was that systems that were put in for maybe one site, 2 or 3 don't work when you get to 6, 7, 8, and 9. So some of them had adapted to that really, really well. And again, to draw it back to sort of the tech and the data and information side, some had used that really well. Others had sort of almost just open up doors and sort of made mistakes along the way and fixed them. Another one of the 3 I went to, which had sort of had the foresight to get all systems in early, so sort of almost scaled the business to larger than it was by starting investing into tech, investing into people, and into infrastructure. But all great businesses and all very proud to be a part of.
That decision at which point do you invest in the team and the system to really go for growth is really difficult. I remember when I ran Hummus Brothers, we were you're kind of at site 2 or 3 already feeling things that it's difficult because you can't be in all 2 or 3 sites at the same time. But what point do you think is the right level where it's not too early that it's not costing the business too much, but it's also not too late that you've left it and you're leaving opportunity on the table?
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a magic number there. I think it's based on what you can afford when, and if you can partner up with systems that are affordable, that give you the opportunity to sort of grow without any bottlenecks or without any barriers quickly. So if you are lucky enough to do very well and maybe have a small acquisition and you go from 3 to 8 sites very quickly, you've got the infrastructure in place there to be able to do that and be able to deliver it. And downloading a report with a few more lines on, it's just as simple as downloading one with 3. If you don't, and you're sort of doing things old school, and it's Excel and it's modeling and it's literally downloading CSV files and copy and pasting, that's when it becomes quite difficult, and you lose opportunity then, and things get in your way.
Cool. And in terms of the systems, so you've just joined Wolfpack a few months ago now. What are the first things you were thinking? Okay, I need to get these things in place for the business really to be in a good footing.
It's a leading question. So Tenzo was the first thing that we put in. I think I've called Christian many times because through our own fault integration took a couple of weeks longer than we wanted. My biggest thing was I need the data. I need to be able to see what's going on in the business for that reason, because I can't be there all the time and I can't be in all the sites. We're looking at changing everything at the moment. I won't say what and how, but yeah, we're looking at new sort of systems across the board. But all of it has to sort of tie into one central dashboard, which is Tenzo for the sake of this business.
And beyond Tenzo, is that your POS, labor, inventory, other things like payments that you're thinking of? What are the kind of maybe 5 or 6 top things that you're coming in beyond Tenzo?
Very honestly, we're looking at everything, not necessarily changing it, but we're looking at point of sale, we're looking at payment solutions, we're looking at QR, we're looking at a new road system, HR support, everything across the board.
Cool. And tell me, in terms of, sorry, I'm just going to move
Chairs a bit.
in terms of hiring, when you're thinking about like growing the team, especially like in businesses that are growing faster, like what is it that, like, how do you approach that? Like, how do you think about like employee branding? How do you think about like the tools that you want to have in place? Like how do you really get a business ready to like really scale in terms of like the number of people that you need?
Do you mean sort of from a support function or from site?
From a support function.
So most recently, we built out a sort of a systems team, a system support team that would sort of help the guys manage the systems that are on site. Because again, going back to sort of giving general managers time, they would, if they had an issue with, say, a stock issue, whatever the case is, they'd spend 4 or 5 hours to kind of drill down into it and looking at all the sort of PLUs and stock reports and everything else. And quite often, they're maybe not as good as somebody else that is really quick on Excel or really quick on whatever systems is we do. So we put in a sort of a systems analyst and a system support person. And very quickly they saw that gave the guys a lot more time. What you run the risk of is them going, right, it's not my problem anymore, you deal with it. So, we came across that, brought everybody together and said, if you need help, we're here to help, but you need to own the problem. So together they sort of work it out. So I think we did that, and that's made a really big sort of difference. But I'd love to have 3 or 4 of those guys, but we need to get to a point where the business can afford to have that. So it's kind of growing organically, growing your team at the same time as at the rate that your business is growing, which is really hard to kind of work out because you don't want to be caught behind, and you also don't want to have a sort of an overhead which you can't sustain.
And is there a KPI you look at for that to see, for example, would you might be looking at, if we're giving too many hours to the existing team, do you look at like the average hours that you might be giving to people to say, oh, if that's going above like 40, 45, then we need to make sure that we're getting ahead of this and hiring more? Like how are there leading indicators that help you think about that?
Well, I think the biggest indicator you can have is your P&L or your accounts at the end of the month, which obviously will give you an indication of how your business is doing. But short answer is no, not really. We will look at anything from sales per labor hour in a specific business where I know that maybe, or the gut feel is that business can run more efficiently. But in other businesses, it might be average transaction value or spend per head or whatever the case is. Whatever information is there, we'd look at it holistically. But each business will kind of tweak and go, right, we know that business is having an issue because there's works on the street, whatever the case is, and therefore pre-5 o'clock nobody can get down there. So we're not going to beat them up because the day sales are off. However, we'll then go, right, okay, well then let's look at ways of growing out other time slots. So time slot data might be important for that side. So each business is different, but it's about then cherry picking what data you want to drip down to your general managers rather than dumping everything on them.
And from Wolfpack's point of view, so in terms of you thinking about how to improve the performance of the business there, like if there was one number that you could move, if you could only choose one, which one would it be that you would try to move? It's a difficult one.
I think ultimately the most important number for any business is top line sales. Without top line sales, it's very difficult to tweak any other numbers. Can't bank percentages. So.
And in terms of top line, would that be like you're thinking average transaction value, or just like the top line, just hoping like in terms of driving people in, or a combination?
Yeah, I'd say a combination. Again, it depends on if we reach capacity. Once we get to capacity, we'd look at ATV, average transaction value. But before that, I'd look at sort of getting as many people in there as we possibly can. And that might be a staffing thing. It might be a service issue. It might be being able to facilitate the extra demand. So it depends.
And you came to the show today and you've had a look at a few things. Are there things that you're thinking about? Like, I know we've seen some robots running around, and like, where do you see the future, like in terms of like technology, and which bits are you excited about in terms of like for Wolfpack and generally for the industry?
I think for the industry, I think what's been interesting is everybody being forced into this sort of QR code ordering world through COVID and through table service and everything else. Some people have kept that. Some people have almost hung their hats on it and have their business model on that, and others have got rid of it completely now because they feel that the sort of personal service isn't there and there isn't the opportunity to upsell. It'd be interesting to see kind of where we go as an industry, whether that becomes the backbone, and then again with labour costs rising, whether or not there is actually a saving there, or does that saving come at the sort of the cost of sales? So it's difficult to say. Again, for us personally, we love the fact that our guys are enthusiastic and live and breathe the brand, and we want to make sure that they're sort of at the tables and doing as much as we can. But at the same time, realize that we can't always be there. So we'll run both processes and kind of see how they work.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's this real dimension of thinking, how do you keep the hospitality, the human connection side of it, and how do you and balancing that with technology and being on that spectrum, not going too far one way or the other, but and identifying the places where actually it makes the customer experience better by introducing it, and where it doesn't make it as good. It's a really challenging decision to be making on that.
Yeah, I think that you'll get it right sometimes. Other times you'll get it wrong. As long as at the end of the day the guest experience is what it needs to be, then people will be understanding.
And a couple of last questions, and then I want to do a quick fire round. But how do you think the customers, having gone through this, their view of the industry, how it's changed through COVID, how do you think you're having to run the business differently now versus maybe when you were at Ping Pong? Are there things that really you're just you look back and you say, oh, that's really changed a lot because customers are have changed their habits, whether it's how they're doing more maybe more delivery or less, or how they're expecting service to be different, or pay at table, or whatever it might be. What are some of the things that you've been
I think one of the things that has always almost, it's actually a good thing, is that with a lot of the sort of tech now, you kind of see the dish before you order it, and if it arrives and doesn't match the picture, people very quickly go, hang on a second, that's not right, or it's missing this, or whatever the case is, which is great, because we used to old school spec manuals on the past would be no chef, that's not right. So that's good, and it's a good thing, and it keeps us honest. The flip of that is people want to pay very, very quickly. So as soon as the meal is finished, they want to pay and go. There's no more kind of hanging around and waiting for the bill and then coming over with an envelope. That kind of thing is it's a challenge, because to get that sort of payment done quickly is what people want. But there is obviously tech out there which you can sort of pay for and everything else. The rest of it is more a case of, we have people that want table service. So bookings for us now is way more than it used to be, because you had to book during the pandemic, and the security that came with that is, we know we're going to have a table, there's going to be 6 seats, so we can kind of have a view of the screen or whatever it is.
Predictability.
It's taken a bit of the sort of spontaneity out of walk-in trade. But again, that's a good opportunity, because we can then route it correctly, and we know what's coming in.
Interesting. Tommy, is there someone in the industry you really admire, and why?
God, that's a hard question. Somebody I really admire, and why? Every answer that's coming to my head is kind of lame. Somebody that, I guess, my first ever real boss, a guy called Chris Pollitt, lives in Australia. He lived and breathed it. He was of the 90-hour-a-week crew, had more energy than anybody else, taught me kind of all the things to do wrong and all the things to do right. And yeah, I think he'd probably be the sort of the person that put me on the path that led me up into today. So he'd probably be the guy, I'd say.
That's amazing. I do think one's first boss often has a big impact on career and how you do. Yeah, so it's incredible you got a good one. I'm going to do a quick round of quick fire questions for you. So, favorite restaurant in London?
Smokestack.
Okay, good. Favorite food?
It'd have to be barbecue, smokestack.
Guilty food pleasures?
Cheese and wine.
That's a good one. I like that. French cheese?
All cheese.
All cheese. One thing you wish you knew before joining the industry?
One thing I wish I knew before joining the industry. I think this is going to sound strange, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think when you join the industry and you a junior manager or a bartender, you work the worst shifts, you close every single night, you have no social life. We're doing sort of 70, 80, 90 hours. the world that we live in today is a lot more sort of mental health focused and work-life balance focused. I think back then we lost a lot of people through just burning them out, and now it's much more of a nurturing industry, which is great.
Yeah, totally agree. It's been amazing, that change. What's been your highlight since joining the industry?
I'd probably say I was very fortunate. I got to go to hotel school in Cornell in New York State, and that was amazing. I did a few modules there and was taught by some of the most incredible lecturers and hospitality professionals, and that was phenomenal. That sort of changed my whole way of thinking of managing of everything else.
Cool.
Highly recommend it.
When did you do that?
2015, 14.
Wow. Okay, amazing. Last thing, what's the one thing you would want to change in hospitality?
I'd probably say, and this is not to get political, but I think in terms of the recruitment crisis or whatever you want to call it, there's so many amazing people that could come if the visa situation had changed. You know, in the past, I've worked with incredible people from all over the world who now can't sort of get work visas. A lot of it sort of changed post, not necessarily Brexit, but even sort of Bangladeshi guys that I've worked with, a lot are still mates today. I find it so hard now for them to sort of come in and work, and we've got such a huge opportunity to get these people in. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to work in hospitality, but we have a massive shortage. So having a set amount of visas, and you know, and again, I'm no politician, but I mean, you know, they could sort of flex that every 6 months and say, right, we have a gap for 6 months, or tighten it up, whatever the case is. Give people the opportunity to come in and work.
100% agree. Listen, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.